What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so now we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 23. More commands from Moses. That's really all you need to know. Moses giving commands to the young generation of Israelites before they head into the promised land. And basically saying, hey, this is how God wants you to live, so that you'll be set apart from the other people groups. Anyway, right off the bat, I'll actually address this footnote here. Verses 23, 1 to 25 are numbered 23, 2 to 26 in the Hebrew text, because the Hebrew text, I guess, originally included the last verse of what is chapter 22 in here, which was the whole thing about a man not marrying his father's former wife. But that seems less so related to this general subsection of things, which is probably why it's separated the way that it is in this version and probably many other modern versions. Anywho, okay, with that out of the way, here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 23. If a man's testicles are crushed or his penis is cut off, he may not be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. Not entirely sure why that would be the case, gotta be honest with ya. There might have been something at the time where some other people group intentionally did things like this as an act of worship to their deities. I don't know. But yeah, you'd almost think the guy would need God all the more. So, yeah. Don't really know what the deal is with that. I'll just move on, because I don't really have an explanation for it. Verse 2. If a person is illegitimate by birth, neither he nor his descendants for 10 generations may be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. Now, I assume when it says illegitimate, it means, like, born out of wedlock. Because otherwise I have no clue what it means by illegitimate there. That's usually what it means when you talk about an illegitimate child. It's not saying, oh, this isn't really a child. It's saying, oh, this is not the child of this married couple here. So, for 10 generations, that's quite a while. But, again, purity standards were kind of big back then. So, plus, again, just separating God's people of this time from others. Nowadays, I would say, again, that, like, this kind of person might need God all the more. So, yay Jesus for coming along and not necessarily requiring us all to hold to all of these standards. Anyway, verse 3. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants for 10 generations may be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. These nations did not welcome you with food and water when you came out of Egypt. Instead, they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in distant Aram Naharaim to curse you. Sorry, it's just lots of in that name. Yeah, Aram Naharaim. Anyway, but the Lord your God refused to listen to Balaam. He turned the intended curse into a blessing because the Lord your God loves you. As long as you live, you must never promote the welfare and prosperity of the Ammonites or Moabites. That one makes sense. There's even some explanation for it in there. Like, these peoples were hostile, or at the very least unwelcoming, to the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt. So, yeah, like, understandable. God didn't want the people who treated the Israelites poorly to be included in, worship at his tabernacle/temple. Then verse 7, kind of on the flip side, do not detest the Edomites or the Egyptians, because the Edomites are your relatives, and you lived as foreigners among the Egyptians. The third generation of Edomites and Egyptians may enter the assembly of the Lord. So they still weren't allowed, I guess, because they're still not directly God's people, but, they weren't as... I don't know. I mean, the Egyptians treated the Israelites pretty harshly, although one could argue that was more so the pharaohs of Egypt than the common Egyptians. But still, they had close experiences and or relations to the Edomites and the Egyptians. Therefore, they weren't as frowned upon, and therefore not as, not as banned, I guess, or at least not banned as harshly or for as long in their bloodline from worshiping in God's assembly. Okay. Back to some more miscellaneous regulations. Yippee. Love these portions. Verse 9. When you go to war against your enemies, be sure to stay away from anything that is impure. Any man who becomes ceremonially defiled because of a nocturnal emission must leave the camp and stay away all day. Toward evening he must bathe himself, and at sunset he may return to the camp. Okay, for a second I thought maybe those were going to be related. They're definitely not. But staying away from stuff that's impure. I mean, it's deemed impure, so, like, kinda duh? And other stuff about just being ceremonially unclean, not touching other things and making those also ceremonially unclean, and then, having to wash to make the man clean again for that part of things. Okay, verse 12. You must have a designated area outside the camp where you can go relieve yourself. Each of you must have a spade as part of your equipment. Whenever you relieve yourself, dig a hole with the spade and cover the excrement. The camp must be holy, for the Lord your God moves around in your camp to protect you and to defeat your enemies. He must not see any shameful thing among you, or he will turn away from you. That kinda makes me wonder a little bit about, that section kind of relating to war situations as well, because they wouldn't necessarily have had camps all the time once they settled into the Promised Land. So I think it was more so when they camp out for war, and or, in the situation that they were in before heading into the Promised Land. It's like, all right, God's presence is deemed to be moving among them. In fact, I think they usually took... I don't know about usually, but, like, I'm pretty sure there are times when it's documented that they took the Ark of the Covenant with them to the battle camp in order to, you know, have God with them, so to speak. So, with God's presence being there, then it's kind of a holy ground sort of situation. Thus, you know, not being okay to relieve themselves on what would be dubbed holy ground. So yeah, that's what makes the most sense of that to me. Again, like, even if it wasn't the Ark of the Covenant, there would have been something that they were supposed to take with them as a sign of, you know, God being with them in the battle. So, yeah, this was not just a, like, modern-day camp where, hey, we're going out camping and having a good time. No, this was probably a battle camp, but definitely something with a signifier of God's presence there. So anyway, moving on to verse 15. If slaves should escape from their masters and take refuge with you, you must not hand them over to their masters. Let them live among you in any town they choose, and do not oppress them. You would assume that, you know, the slave leaving a master would have a significant reason for doing so. Thus, you know, not handing them back over to their oppressor. Like, they're trying to escape oppression, probably. So, like, don't keep them in a bad situation. Whether by giving them back to their master or by just putting them in another bad situation. And with slavery, I don't know, like, I wonder how much this was common practice, say, back in, like, Civil War times. I mean, I know there were a lot of, or based on the history books, I shouldn't say I know, but based on the history books, there were a lot of, you know, people up in the North being anti-slavery who, you know, would serve as places of refuge for the slaves. And I think it's kind of safe to assume that the slaves would not have been just given back to their masters. Now, if the masters, you know, came in, fought whoever was giving the slave refuge, and won, and then took forcefully their slaves back, that was probably a different situation. But anyway, I digress. Like, don't intentionally put or keep someone in a bad spot. Anyway. Okay, verse 17. No Israelite, whether man or woman, may become a temple prostitute. When you are bringing an offering to fulfill a vow, you must not bring to the house of the Lord your God any offering from the earnings of a prostitute, whether a man or a woman, for both are detestable to the Lord, your God. So, really, like, the word temple could probably be eliminated from there. But, yeah, that action was apparently so looked down on by God that it's like, you know, don't even be bringing your dirty money in here either. And not just the money, but things that would have been bought with said money. Footnote there. Okay, that's potentially a very different thing. But, like, the Hebrew says a dog, but, like, you wouldn't have a dog literally be a prostitute. Like, that makes no sense. So, I wonder if this is, dog as in, like, the kind of meant as an insult. Where it really meant, like a disgraceful man. Anyway, moving on to verse 19. Do not charge interest on the loans you make to the fellow Israelite, whether you loan money or food or anything else. You may charge interest to foreigners, but you may not charge interest to Israelites, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you do in the land you are about to enter and occupy. So, because, fellow Israelites, all God's people, they should have had each other's best interests in mind. Thus, the no interest on loans. But nowadays, that would be a lot harder to keep track of anyway, so, like, the question of, even if there was, say, a Jewish-run bank giving out loans with interest, even that's kind of... I'd be curious to know if there are any such banks that would inherently not charge interest to someone who is, able to verify that they are of Jewish descent. But, yeah, that just the modern culture kind of complicates the enforcement of this quite a bit. So yeah. And obviously God's people, I shouldn't say obviously, but like, because of God's people being set apart, they had a little more favor amongst each other than foreigners did. But foreigners still weren't supposed to be treated poorly or anything. Even in that day and age, clearly charging interest on a loan was not a new concept. And it was a way to help ensure the repayment of said loan. And there's a couple other, possible benefits to actually charging interest, but now's not the time to go on that tangent. So, I guess I'll hop over to verse 21 here. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, be prompt in fulfilling whatever you promised him. For the Lord your God demands that you promptly fulfill all your vows, or you will be guilty of sin. However, it is not a sin to refrain from making a vow. But once you have voluntarily made a vow, be careful to fulfill your promise to the Lord your God. Some things to this effect were mentioned earlier. I forget if it was earlier in Deuteronomy or maybe in, like, Leviticus or something. I don't know. Or Numbers, maybe. But, like, don't make a vow, especially to God, and then not fulfill it. And the longer you delay on it, the more likely it is that you're not going to fulfill it. So, like, don't try and push it off, because then you'll just be tempted to keep pushing it off further. But not making a vow in a given situation is fine. So, really, I think all that means it's best to be selective with your vows. Especially if they're to God. Okay. Time to wrap this up. Verse 24. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, but you must not carry any away in a basket. And when you enter your neighbor's field of grain, you may pluck the heads of grain with your hand, but you must not harvest it with a sickle. Okay, so maybe some of these allowances are why there was the previous command of, I'm pretty sure it was in the last chapter, about not putting additional crops in between the rows of a vineyard. Because, like, you know, if somebody was passing by, say, for, you know, extended travel, or if there was somebody who was poor, who might have needed the food just to live, like, this kind of thing was allowed. But, like, in a full-on vineyard, you know, one person going and getting their fill of grapes wouldn't have taken too much away from the overall crop. So, anywho, I think that was really mostly the point as well. It's like, okay, if you really need to grab something, because why would you be taking this if you didn't really need it? If you need to grab something from your neighbor's vineyard or grain field or whatever, like, yeah, okay, fine, take what you need, but only what you need for right now. Don't be, like, trying to stockpile somebody else's stuff, because it's not yours. You didn't work for it. Anywho. Okay. I guess that'll do it for Deuteronomy chapter 23. Okay, so we got another chapter with mostly just kind of random regulations again. This kind of almost has the feeling of, like, somebody writing down a grocery list at the last minute or something like that. And they just want to try and make sure they don't miss anything, but it's also kind of just, like, haphazardly thrown out there. I'm not saying that this was haphazardly thrown out there. It just kind of has that vibe to it. Especially this section that's got all these just, like, miscellaneous items. But anyway, that's probably enough digressing on that point. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. You can also follow me if you're on Rumble, or look down in the description to follow me on any other social media pages. And below that, leave comments with your thoughts on whatever you have in mind. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.